While standing in the midst of darkness, it is the optimism of the light that keeps us hopeful of a new dawn that is on the horizon. It is estimated that 1 out of every 6 boys will become the victim of childhood sexual assault before they reach the age of 18. What would you do if you found out that your son, brother, father, or grandfather was the victim of childhood sexual assault? Are we prepared as a family and as a community to break the silence and give this topic the attention it so rightfully deserves? Well, I am, and so are the 3 courageous men who were willing to share their story in this frank and cross-cultural conversation. I invited Reginald Prince, O'Brien Dennis, and Brent Smith to join me in the nation's capital for this epic conversation. 3 powerful stories, 1 gripping conversation that epitomizes tragedy, triumph, and forgiveness. This is Whispers in the Night, the journey back to the light. So last night we left off actually talking about the impact of what this conversation would bring to the black male community of those who are still dealing with childhood sexual trauma. And what I wanted to make sure that we started off with this time is I wanted to get a background of each of you guys so that way we can show that this this issue or this problem is not really focused on one type of configuration. But I want you to start off, Brent, and just tell me just a little bit about how you grew up and your family background.
Well, I grew up in a very church environment. My dad is a deacon. My mother is like my rock. Like she's always been there. She still is. My dad has always been in my life. I grew up, like I said, I grew up in the church, so everything I did was revolved around that growing up. Wednesday, Sunday, that's where you were.
So for all accounts, you grew up with what, 3 or 4 siblings in the household?
Yeah, I have 3 brothers, 1 sister.
And you're the youngest, right?
Correct.
And you had both your mother and your father in the home. So by all accounts, you had what some of us would call the ideal childhood setup. What type of child were you growing up? So were you that shy child or that outgoing child, that introvert? Or?
I was very outgoing and open as a child. I was always outside. I was a kid who played and rode my bike and ran around and always dirty. Like that was me. Like you didn't really have a choice. It was, you're not gonna sit in the house all day. Go outside, go play, go do something, So that's how I grew up until,
Of course.
Yeah.
Now, what about the extended family, your cousins, your aunts, uncles, grandparents? And so what was that like growing up?
They were all there. I mean, we were like my family is very close overall. So my grandmother lived next door my whole life growing up, so that's how it was. If I wasn't at home, I was at grandmother's or I was at aunts down the street. It's very country, but my family overall, is very loving and, everybody's good.
So basically, if mom and dad were not around, you knew and you had the trust that someone was there to care for you in your best interest.
Correct.
Okay. But I want to move to the slight difference, and not necessarily difference, but the difference and the commonalities that you and I, Reggie, have in growing up, because like you, I was raised by my grandparents. My parents also wed at a young age, which is what we both share. But I want you to talk more about what it was growing up with your grandparents.
Well, my mother, like you said, my parents were very young. My mom was 17 when she had me.
Okay.
They got married. My mom was 18, and I grew up in Florida, in Sanford, a very country town, and my mom dropped out of school to, have me, and then she went back to school, and then she moved to go to college. She moved to Atlanta.
Okay.
And so I stayed with my grandparents. And my family, like Brent's, is a very religious family. Pastors, deacons, bishops, missionaries, evangelists, that's where I come from. Also very musical because a lot of people played drums, keyboards, organ, that type of thing. My grandparents also raised my cousins. So I come from a very huge family, and it consisted of, there was never less than probably 10 people at minimum in my grandparents' home on a daily basis. Their home was a central kind of place in the neighborhood. So everybody came there. My aunt was down the street. Another aunt was around the corner. My dad's side of the family was around another corner. Like the whole neighborhood was related to me in some way, either immediate or extended. So, that whole term, takes a village.
Right.
Well, my village was there. It was my family. Like I said, extended or immediate. And, my childhood coming up was cool. It was typical. I mean, I stayed outside. I played. I was, I'm country, so I didn't wear shoes outside. Barely a shirt. Had
So and so from your story so far, so it's safe to say that both of you had what we would call a safe, nurturing, trusting, cared for childhood. Whereas in the beginning there was nothing to there wasn't a predisposition to what we plan to talk about later.
Oh no, not at all, not at all.
And so do you both feel that for the way that you grew up that it created a higher level of trust because there was nothing to distrust in the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. I would, yeah.
Now, I want to go to Mr. O'Brien, and I want to hear about how you, well, first of all, I want to make sure that the audience knows that as compared to us who were here in the States, you hail from Jamaica. So your upbringing is a little different than ours, but I want you to talk about just that family makeup and how you grew up and how your childhood was.
So I grew up with my grandmother because my mom had migrated to Canada at one point. So my sister and I grew up with my grandmother for most of the time. My uncles were around. I had cousins, and for the most part, grandma home was a central home. We were expected to go to church on a Sunday. We stopped going to church on Sunday, then she transformed to going to church on a Saturday. So religion played a very, very important role in our life. And for the most part, I was somewhat of an introvert. And that came from a very early part of my upbringing because of what occurred so early on in my life. So I lived with a very dark secret. So I didn't really go out much and play with the kids in the neighborhood or anything. I kept to myself for the most part.
Now, what's interesting and what's common in all of your stories is that all of you have a religious background in your upbringing, which of course is the start of your values, is the start of the fundamentals of what will later become your personal values and the things that you use to uphold your own self-esteem and the way that you view yourself as a person and as a man. Now, Dennis, I want to ask you, growing up in Jamaica, what, for you and your configuration, what was the semblance of manhood for you?
So my father wasn't around, so he wasn't the ideal example. But traditionally, men had 10, 15 kids with several different women, and that's what a man is. And the woman was typically the head of the household, and that was just your job as a man. You have as many kids. And as I got older, I realized that the slavery tradition and custom had more to do with that as a colonial island. And back in the slavery days, men were expected to not forge binding relationships as a result of the plantocracy period. So their jobs were just to get women pregnant and have as many kids as possible. So kids were more seen as a economic livelihood. So my uncles, however, so my grandmother had this whole idea that in order for her family to evolve to a different phase, that they needed to be educated. So I valued education from a very, very early age. My uncle had gone to Europe to get educated. There's another uncle of mine who had remained on the island to get educated. And there's an uncle of mine who was a police. So The discipline was there, but the discipline was not to have as many kids as possible to try and prove a point to anybody. So I excelled in school a lot, and that's where most of my comfort came in.
So you're saying based on tradition that the sign of manhood was how many children that you can make?
And how many women you can have sex with.
I want to jump into the reason why we're talking. I know your stories. I know all three of your stories. I've lived with Reggie, your story, and Brent, your story for 2 years because I started writing a book because it was very interesting to hear that people that I had known in my circle had gone through childhood sexual trauma, but we had no connection to each other to share these stories, whether we were healed of it or not, but that we can graduate into openly talking about it without the shame and the supposed disgrace and the ridicule, but that we can have an open dialogue to affect other people that may still be stuck in that. But I want to go to you, Reggie, because this probably affected me more so than the rest of the stories because I've known you for a long time and didn't know that we shared this in common. How old were you when the first incident happened?
It was between the age of 9 and 11. I was about, I think I was like 10.
Okay.
And I remember I had on, Star Wars was big back then. So I had on my Star Wars PJs, and I used to have this this Yoda doll from Star Wars that I used to carry. I had it with me at all times. And, you know, I was like, I explained earlier, my childhood upbringing, whatever. And I had moved with my mom by this time because she had graduated from college. She came and got me and moved with her. So everything was cool, real good. And my brother had been born by this time. I have a brother. I'm the oldest, and we're 8 years apart.
Okay.
And my mom was a single parent because by this point, my mom and my stepdad had been divorced. And so she was a single parent raising me and my brother, and she was working like 2 jobs at the time. So my cousin kept us, you know, when she would go to work, or, you know, sometimes she had to fly out of town. And anyways, one night, my mom had to fly out of town or something for a job, and it was any normal night, you know, any normal night than when he kept us or whatever. You know, at that time the big gaming system was Atari. You know, we would play Atari, you know, pop popcorn, boil hot dogs. You know, it was watch movies. You know.
But let me stop you for just a second. How old was your cousin at this time?
He was like, I think at the time, 17, 18.
Okay, so he was pretty much, if not an adult, quite close to that margin of being an adult.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was.
Okay.
And so this particular night, you know, like I said, everything was normal, you know, nothing out of the ordinary. He had asked me if I wanted to play tent. Well, I had never played tent. So I was like, well, what is that? You know, and he was like, I'm gonna show you. So he got this brown cover. It was like really ratted and nappy, had those little rolls on it. I remember with the silk edgings on the end of it. You know, he put a stick in the middle of the floor and threw the blanket over, and this was our tent. And we were playing Atari, and at some point I fell asleep. And I remember being awakened by him touching me. But I pretended to still be asleep. You know, I was shocked, scared, and very nervous. I didn't know what to do. So I just, basically, I thought I'd play sleep, you know, thinking that if I played sleep, he would stop. But he didn't.
And so where was he touching you?
My butt.
Okay.
Yeah. He was rubbing me.
Okay.
You know, and like I said, I thought if I played sleep, he would stop. But he didn't. You know, it progressed with him pulling down my pants. And so I, you know, scooted away but he pulled me back. And I still just was playing dead. I didn't know what to do. I didn't say anything. I didn't open my eyes, anything. And, like I said, he pulled my pants down. And at that point, he had gotten on top of me. I was on my stomach by this point. He'd gotten on top of me, and he, was like grinding on me until he ejaculated. And then he got up, and he went and got a cloth. He came back, and he wiped it off, pulled my pants up, and he pushed me, and he went off in his room. And so I got up the next morning, like nothing had happened. It was weird because it was like I wasn't there.
So basically you checked out of the scene.
Basically, yeah. And I didn't know, because I was so young, I didn't know how to process everything I was feeling. It wasn't until later that I did, but like I said, it was as if I wasn't there.
Now, although you checked out, do you remember having a sense of fear or a sense of confusion
I was confused. I remember when he first touched me and it woke me up, and I remember instantly I was terrified, and I was thinking, what is he doing? What's going on? And being confused by why was he doing this? Why was he touching my butt? I remember those thoughts, but after that, I checked out.
And I remember your story. You were telling me that for you, in your case, the next morning was as if it never happened.
It was as if it never happened. I was in a gifted school early on. When I moved with my mom, she had me tested and all this stuff. And so I was in this gifted school. I was learning German, and I was in this whole program thing and making A's and whatever. And at that point, I changed. It was like this light that I had went out, and I became mean. I stopped talking a lot. The old me didn't exist anymore. The fun person that was, running, climbing trees and all this other stuff I did in the country, and playing with my cousins and all that. I wasn't him no more. I just kind of went in a hole, so to speak.
So how often or how many times after that do you remember it happening?
After that, it was pretty frequent.
And it was with the same person? Was there an escalation in the type of attack? So let's call it what it is. It was an attack.
It was, yeah. At first it was a lot of touching and fondling and him grinding on me. And then it escalated into him actually penetrating me. So yeah, it did progress.
Now the escalation after it finally escalated to penetration, after that happened, was there any difference in the way that you responded based on the type of escalation, or was it all the same? Was it still you blocking it out and becoming more detached from, I guess, your own world?
Yeah, I became more and more detached. I was making F's in school. I went from, like I said, it was a steady decline. I was failing all my classes. I had started to drink. Nobody knew.
How old were you when you started drinking, though?
I was about 13, 14. I drank, I slept.
How did that change your interaction with other males?
I didn't. I kind of removed myself from them. I stopped talking. I didn't really deal with my family too much. I would be there, but not there.
Okay.
Whereas I used to go hang out with my male relatives or whatever. If we were in a group setting, a family setting, I was cool. But if we were going to go off and hang out, I would just say, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to stay here. So it changed the dynamic in that I didn't really associate myself with males anymore. Not just my family, period.
What was that burden like? Because you had to be, your early teens, when most teenagers are looking forward to puberty and all this other stuff, the body changing and girls and dating and driving. What was that burden like for you walking around with that every day, waking up knowing that I still know and I'm still carrying this?
It was bad, man. It was really bad because by my teen years, I hated my body. Like everything about it, from my face to my thighs, my legs, my butt, my chest. I hated everything about my body. So I then covered it. I wore big clothes. I always wore long sleeves, baggy pants, big shirts, because I didn't want anybody to see my body because I hated it. And I also thought that it was something about my body that caused this to happen to me.
Your introduction to this trauma is quite similar to yours because yours happened because your mother went away and your cousin was also at home with you at your home, right? But I want you to tell the story as far as the circumstances that led to what happened in your case.
I can definitely remember I was 7 years old. My mother and father had went out of town. Every now and then they would take trips and different things like that. My aunt and her son, they would come to our house and they would stay there whenever they would go out of town. Everything, normally had been fine. Nothing, it was nothing out of the ordinary. They would come, they would just be there. It wouldn't be nothing different. I would still be doing my own thing, out and about, whatever. And one particular night, I never forget, I had bunk beds. And I would always just sleep on the top bunk in my room. And when they came, I would let him sleep on the bottom. By this time, my cousin, had to be a junior or senior in high school. He had, this particular night, he came in. I was already in the bed. And I heard him when he came in, but I didn't move. I was just laying there, And he says to me, come here. And I was like, what? I'm thinking to myself, what do you want? But I didn't think anything different. So I just climbed down, went down there. I was like, what's up? And he was like, just lay here with me. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay. But I didn't really know how to react to the situation. So I just laid there. And I actually fell asleep. He fell asleep. And I was just there. He hadn't touched me or anything. And I guess after a while, as the night progressed, he started to touch my nipples. And I immediately woke up because I feel everything. Like if I'm touched, I'll feel it. And he touched my nipple. And I was thinking, okay, what is he doing? What is he doing? And he started to just rub my nipple. And then he started rubbing on my other nipple. And I was just like, okay. And so I said, what are you doing? And he said, don't talk. And I was just like, okay. Okay. And he just started to take his hand and rub it down my leg. And I was like, what are you doing? He said, I'm not going to tell you again not to talk. And, the more he did it, I was just like, okay. But in a weird way, of course I was scared because I didn't know what was going on. But at the same time, I felt like I trusted him, being that he was always around, that I was still going to be okay. And that was the first night. He didn't go past that. He touched me, he rubbed on me a little bit, and that was it. And then it was like nothing happened to him. But to me, I was very uncomfortable. That next day, I was just confused and like, what in the world was that? But
how did you feel the moment after when you knew you were in the clear that night and that it stopped? What was what was your bodily reaction? What was your mental reaction after that?
I was, like I said, I was still in like a shocking phase, like really like what happened? What was that? You know, I didn't know really what else to think. Because in my head, I just knew that that was different. That hadn't happened ever. And I just wanted to, like, it was like in my head, one side of my head, I knew I needed to talk to somebody or tell somebody. And then the other side was like, no, you know, it's really weird. Like, I can't explain it, but I just.
So what was the next day like? I mean, waking up, you know, sun is shining, and you should be the jovial kid that's getting up at age of 7 and going out and playing ball or doing whatever you usually did. What was that next day like for you?
That everything changed. Like, I didn't, and that was the thing. And it's interesting because even his mother noticed. She was like, you know, you've been in the house all day. You know, are you gonna go outside? Are you gonna do something today? And I was like, no, I'm okay. I literally stayed locked up in my room that entire day. And like laying in the room, I didn't even get in the bed. I was sitting on the floor in a corner with the lights off.
What was going through your head?
Just confusion. Like I was, and to myself, I was saying to myself, okay, I think more so I was just scared. Like I didn't know what else to do. I didn't think in my, you know, to myself, I was thinking, you know, I can't tell nobody about this, you know, and I left it at that. I wasn't going to tell anybody at that moment. The second night, things went a little bit more further than before. It was like I knew. I felt in my spirit, okay, he's gonna try something again, and he did. That night when he came in, he same routine. He was like, "Come down here," and so of course, I was like, "Why?" And he was like, "Don't ask me questions. Just come down here." And so I went. I laid down, and this time instead of him not immediately doing it as last time, this time he immediately jumped into it. And he started to rub his hands on me again. And this time he was rubbing his hands down my back. And when he got to my butt, I can definitely remember like jumping, like, you know, like, what are you doing? And he began to use his finger on me. So I was quiet. I didn't move. And he's whispering in my ear telling me, you better not say anything. And I'm like, okay. And that was the second night. As far as that, he didn't go past doing that, but that's as far as he went. And after he finished, he said, if you tell anybody, I will hurt you.
So for a whole week of your mother being gone, every night was a nightmare.
Every night was a nightmare.
What was that like, knowing that in the sunlight you were dealing with the heaviness of this, only to anticipate at night something else happening? But you remember that burden of, you know, being 7 and knowing, yeah, in about 12 more hours, something's going to happen.
Right, and that's kind of how it was. I was afraid, like, okay, when it was time to go, like, I would hate for his mother to say, okay, it's time for you to go to bed.
Because you
in
knew
my
it was
head,
about to
I'm
happen.
thinking, oh, you know, so I would always try to, like, you know, kind of step a little longer. Can I go do this? And she's like, no, it's, you know, go to bed. You know, and I just go and I'll lay down and I'll just sit there.
So let's talk about the night where you tried to resist that night.
The night that I tried to resist was actually the last night that it happened. He went as far as, you know, the plastic bats as kids that we have, the little bats.
Oh, the bats. Right,
Little
right, the
They're
bats.
like, you know, about this long. He went as far as putting one of them inside of me. And
Wow, okay.
And that was like something I could not deal with. So I began to scream, and he put his hands over my mouth and told me to shut up, or he was going to hurt me. And so I did, because I didn't know what else to do. And so then I kind of tried to throw my arm up, like around his neck, like pushing him away. And he kind of like put his hand in my chest and shoved me back. And then it's like he just realized something and stopped. And when he stopped, he just looked at me. And he was just like, you better remember what I said. And this better not ever come up again.
But there was another incident where you tried to scream, but something else physical happened.
Yeah. He hit me. He hit me it started around a Sunday or Monday. So it had to be between that Wednesday and Thursday. He hit me across the face.
And why did he hit you?
Because he went as far as trying to put his penis inside of me. So, and I was like, I didn't want to do it. I wasn't going to do it. And I can really remember right now, because he would always come in, and I think the most disturbing part was I can still to this day smell like his scent, trying to, of the things he was doing and being on me. And he would just he would always ejaculate. And when he would ejaculate, he would do it on me. And to myself, I would always think, like, why is he doing this to me?
But at 7, you didn't know at the time what ejaculation was.
I didn't even know what that was.
But you just knew that, like, at the end of this,
right,
I felt dirty.
I didn't even know that could happen again. And then there was still that, I had that thought of, if I say anything, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and my parents are going to be upset, and they're going to do this, and the family thing. I was really big on family as well, so I didn't want there to be any separation. I was thinking more about everybody else instead of myself.
So isn't it, so far between your two stories, so isn't it interesting, whereas, and even my story as well, is that as children, we're thinking about everybody else. Yeah. When usually children are selfish little creatures. Children are like me, my ball, my time, I need you for me. Whereas now we graduated into the responsibility that we're thinking like adults. Right. At 7, at 13, and me at 4 and 5. Well, let's talk about when your mother finally came back home. What happened?
When my parents came back home, when they returned, I never, once again, I still never said anything.
But did they? But could your mother or father tell anything changed?
My mom could tell that something was wrong with me, and I kid you not, she's all till this day she knows if something's wrong with me. So I think that's just a mother's thing. They know, and she, after everyone left, and it was just us and my brother, his other brother who lived in the household as well. My mom. She asked me, she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes." Immediately, it was just like, "Yes." And she said, "Okay, you look like something's wrong." And I was like, "No, I'm fine." And for about 2, maybe 3 weeks straight, before she actually said anything, my routine was I go to school, I would come home, go to my room, and I would be in that room until the next morning, to time to go to school again. That's what I did. She would come in, and I would be laying in the bed, complete dark. Could be daylight still outside, and I would just be in the dark. And she would be like, "Why are you always shut up in your room? Like, what's wrong? What's going on?" And it's like she knew, and still to myself, I was like, "Nothing. I'm fine.
But
I'm okay."
Do you recall at that age what was running through your head at that time?
Angry. I was like the angriest person at that time. Like I was so angry.
Now, let me ask both of you, and because you were both angry, were you angry just because it happened, or what were you angry about?
I mean, I was angry because of what he had done to me and how that changed me and how it made me feel. You know, I didn't like Reggie. You know, I didn't like anything about myself. I didn't like my body. I didn't like my skin. I didn't like the way I spoke. I didn't like anything. So everything that I liked about myself before, his actions changed everything. It changed all of that. You know, I became this very, you know, angry person, very mean to other people. I didn't like other people.
So you were angry. So you were angry primarily because of what he did, and secondly because of the result of how it made you feel.
Right.
Was that similar to you, or was there anything different outside of what he said in terms of?
I think my biggest thing was I was confused. So I didn't like the confusion. Like I didn't like any confusion at all. And in my head, it was just like, I want to tell somebody, and then I'm thinking, no, I can't tell nobody.
Because
and
you had the burden of the family thing. Now, I want to ask you, what was the safety level in your mind, feeling like you at the time, you know, you were kind of a preteen, and you were still a kid.
Well, it's weird because I didn't really, on one end, I didn't feel safe with anybody, you know. But then I always felt secure with my grandfather and that surrounding, you know, that made me feel, my family, that immediate core of people, I always felt safe with them. But then anybody outside of that, like I didn't feel safe at all, period. I didn't even interact with other people.
And so what about you?
I interacted. I still interacted with people. My whole thing is, I, from being asked by my mother so much, you know, are you okay and what's going on, I feel like I needed to try to hide that because I was afraid that I was going to say something. So I would start to just, to everyone I was okay. I would make that appearance like everything was okay, but I really wasn't okay.
You know, and there's, you know, and this lends truth is saying that every lie has weight to it. You have to perpetuate it, even if you don't believe it. You have to add things behind the lie.
Yeah,
and so it becomes this stone on either shoulder, and you're walking around with this because you have to not say believe the lie, you have to make everybody else believe the lie.
Yeah, like I mentioned in the dinner that we had the other night, I created two people. You know, so at a very early age, I was an actor, and I was damn good at it. You know, no one would know anything that was going on in here. You know, that didn't come out until I was by myself behind closed doors. So to my family, to the school, you know, I was still Reggie. You know what I mean? But behind closed doors, I was.
So you mastered the lie.
Oh yeah.
So both of you mastered. So you basically you have to split in two, at least in two, and master the lie. Now, I want to go to O'Brien because you and I became introduced because you were a guest on one of my online radio shows, and I recently got your book, The Cries of Men. I hadn't read it before you were a guest on my show, and had I read it, this show probably would have been a deeper segment than I had anticipated, because I have to tell you, in the first 16 pages, and I told you at dinner, through the first 16 pages, my mouth was on the floor. It has to be one of the most comprehensively researched yet explicit, detailed accounts of male sexual abuse that I have ever read. It was as if I was reading a tale of three people, that this couldn't have possibly happened to one person. your story actually requires a movie. Let me just be real with you. It is that compelling, and for anyone that reads it, they have to have an open mind to understand that this is your life and your heart put on paper, and not on, and as I said in the dinner, us three, we're living in the cultural aspect of being here in the States. But you've introduced me to the aspect of being a Jamaican, dealing with male sexual trauma, and what that means in Jamaica, which is trifold to the magnitude of depression and anger and shame, guilt, persecution even. I want you to talk about, I don't even know how to put it because it's so profound. I don't even know where to start with your story, but I know that it started at age 5, right?
Yeah. So before I go into the story, the reason why I wrote the book as candidly as I did, when I moved to America when I was 21 years old, I kept doing a lot of research. And I wanted to figure if what happened to me back home, if it was unique to Jamaica, or did it happen to anybody else? And I read books that related to Caucasian men, but they weren't candid. And one thing that I could not find in any literature or any research were any subject topic about black boys being victimized or being sexually abused. So I decided to tell the story from my perspective, because in the book there are varied stages. So in the beginning, it was the voice of that 5-year-old boy that I was able to capture on paper. And as I got into my life, I kept developing the story according to my age. So I first got sexual abuse when I was 5 years old.
And what happened?
All right, so Kingston is more like a urban area. So the majority of the population flock to Kingston for jobs. So because of lack of proper living space, you'll have several different rooms in one big yard, and there's one big kitchen and there's one bathroom, and everyone used that one bathroom. So on that particular day, I was passing by the shower, and the young man I was in there was about 17, 16, thereabouts. His mom usually sewed for my mom, and there was literally no curtains. So I was passing and he called me in, and I was a bit hesitant going inside because I was trying to figure out why he's calling me. But there was a part of me that was curious because he had hair. He was a fully developed young man, and I was somewhat curious as to why is it he's a male, I'm a male, his body looked that way, but I looked the way in which I did. And as I approached him, he took the soap bar and he started to play with his penis. And it's the reality that it grew from such a small thing into something so big. Remember, at 5, I had no clue about sexuality or sex, anything. So I was just curious as to why is it all of this was happening to him, but it never happened to me before. So I went over and he asked me to touch it. He eventually washed the soap off and he coached me into putting it into my mouth. I distinctly remembered when he kept thrusting faster and further until he ejaculated in my mouth. And at that point I had no clue what that was. And it wasn't until when I was probably about 10, 11 there, but when I was going through puberty, I realized what that white milky substance was. I had no clue. But for years and then, I had the taste of his semen in my mouth for a very, very long time.
So let's go back to the act itself. At 5, you had a curiosity based on your own body, and to you it was almost as if you were trying to discover what was next for you, because because this was an adult or some it was a much more mature version of what you were looking forward to, or did you feel violated? Because because I'm not sure exactly.
There was a part of me that knew that something was wrong because he kept hushing me to not say anything. So it was a non-verbal action. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. It was me on my knees looking up on him, seeing his facial expression. But I, in the back of my mind at that age, never expected him to hurt me or harm me because his mom had a great relationship with my mom. He also had a great relationship with my mom because there were occasions where my mom wanted stuff from the shop that he would have done it for her. So you wouldn't expect someone who has that relationship with my parent to violate me in any way.
What was the feeling afterwards in your psyche? What were you going through after this?
So the following evening, when our kids growing up, we play what's called Moonshine Baby. So when the moon was full, you would lay on the ground and you get rocks and you put around the person and you make it one angel, so you become Moonshine Baby. So the following night, me and the other kids who were in the tenement setting were playing Moonshine Baby and we're hiding, and he came behind me, and I remember he pulled my shorts down and he attempted to play with my butthole. But in the background, I heard my grandmother calling out for me, and I ran away. But when I ran away, he also came back behind me in that dark. And my grandmother knew that something happened.
Well, how do you know that she knew something had happened?
I could see her facial expression. It was one of those questioning look where she was probably expecting me to come to her to say something. But as I got older, I realized my culture, and I put in the cultural context, that she probably would have made a connection between him doing something to me and homosexuality. So it was easier for her to not deal with it by just waiting for me, hopefully, to say something to me. So what grandma did was she moved me and my sister back to her home in the country, and she never brought us back. And I never knew why she never brought us back to that tenement setting. But from that point on, I had a very good relationship with grandma. She was more nurturing from that point. And as I said to you guys last night, I put that incident somewhere in the back of my mind, and I had nightmares for a very, very long time. And like you, I started drinking from 9, and I'd go to school with this water cooler bottle mixed with white rum and orange juice. And no one knew, because that was my escape to what was going on around me. Before that incident occurred, I heard I was a very vibrant kid that loved to run up and down. But it just got to a point where I know had a secret.
So how does a 9-year-old get white rum and orange juice and take it in?
So this is more cultural. So unlike America, where there's a legal limit to when you can access alcohol, back home there's no legal limit.
So you can be any age.
Yes.
And you can go in the store?
You can't go in the store, but it was customary if you had an older male friend that they will give you beer, they will give you rum. And rum was embedded in our culture because...
And culturally, it wasn't as if you're at home with auntie and if I gave little Reggie something to drink, someone would shun you because why would you inflict that upon a child?
And even we always had parties and stuff, and white rum was an integral part of our mourning process. So when someone dies and people come over for that whole process, there's bottles of white rum. And it's customary to give kids a taste.
Now, I know that you talked about, about the alcohol and about, did you say smoking too?
Yeah.
Okay, smoking and other things. So these were all coping mechanisms. What if any were your coping mechanisms before you decided to come out about what happened? Or did you have any?
Not negative ones, Not like, well, smoking or drinking or anything like that. Mine was really just dance. That helped me get through a lot.
So your coping mechanism, which we can safely say was our escape, for you was dance.
Right.
I want to find out from you, O'Brien.
For me, religion brought more confusion. Because I got baptized at age 8 because I felt that I had inadvertently did something. You talk about your body image. I grew up for a very, very long time feeling ashamed of my body. I felt that I was unattractive. I felt that I was fat. I felt no one wanted me. And it got to a point where I felt if anyone wanted me, it was only for sex. So I got baptized at 8 because I wanted God to forgive me for what I had done to myself, because I lived with that self-blame for a very, very long time. And the whole religion and culture cannot clash when it happened at 14 again from a trusted neighbor. And that episode continued from 14 to 16, but he coached me. I wasn't doing good in school, but it was more of a setup between that person and my childhood playmate, whom I had become very sexual with. It's just, I guess it was just a boy period where you're going through puberty and you explore with another kid your age group. He concocted some situation where I went to my playmate's cousin's house, and the cousin stood at the distance without me knowing what was going on and watched us having sex.
So you were lured into performing sexually without even knowing that you were being watched?
There's a part of me that knew something was going on, but I just couldn't get the answer for it, because I kept asking him, are you sure you're home alone? Are you sure that there's no one else in the house? And it wasn't until when I was leaving the house, I realized that there were shoes that wasn't present when I came in at first. So I knew something was up. And a couple of days after, the cousin called me over to the house and he told me all that he saw. And to an extent, he was trying to blackmail me. And I was able to navigate my way out of that situation, explain to him that if he ever had gone to my mom, that she would not have taken keen to him saying those things about her son. And he was a bit impressed at how I handled myself. So he asked me how school was going, and I told him I wasn't doing the best. So he became a close confidant by helping me with my school grades. And that was where the confusion between myself and him and what he did to me came about, because he was very, very fundamental in helping me to be focused in school. I wasn't getting good grades, and all of a sudden with this man helping me, my grades went all the way up. And my mom was excited because she didn't have to go to school to pick up my report cards anymore. And I remember when my report card came when I was about 15 going to 16, my mom didn't have to pick it up, so I was beyond excited and I showed it to him. And he asked me if there's anything that I could give to him. There was this night, it was raining, and I was outside, and he held on to me, and the soundtrack of Wait and Exhale was playing in the background, and he forced himself inside of me. I went home that night, and I was bleeding so much. I even slit my wrist because a couple of nights before I was watching something on television where a girl was depressed and she slit her wrist, and that was her way of dealing with everything. I survived, obviously. I went to school.
Let's stop there. So you were ready to check out of here because it was so heavy for you. It was so heavy for you that was the only answer you had. During the healing process, I guess that pain was literally a reminder
Yes.
of
And
what had happened.
It's one of those situations where for a very, very long time as a kid, as a teenager growing up, even into an adult, I didn't like going to use the bathroom because it brought back vivid memories of what he did to me.
And it's interesting you say that because I think each one of us can talk about at least one thing that reminded us so much about what happened that we either tried not to do it or refused to be a part of that, I guess, that space of what reminded us of the incident because we had yet to cope with it. But I know that both you and Reggie talked about body image, but I want to ask you, Brent, after all this happened, because we never really touched on it, what was your perception of yourself, your body image, and your self-esteem? How did you feel that you fit into the world around you after all this happened?
I think I think for the most part, I was okay when it came to that. Actually, like, I didn't feel like. I mean, I think my self-esteem wasn't like high, but I wasn't looking at myself like, okay, I'm less this or I'm less that, or it didn't make me feel like I was ugly or anything of that nature. I was just more so, like I said, mine was just more on it, just a confusing.
But can we all agree that it made our self-consciousness super elevated?
A mental thing, right?
And I talked about this last night at the dinner table. That at least for me, I can tell, and I think we all agree that whatever we thought about ourselves, we thought that everyone else thought.
Right.
If I thought I was ugly, someone must have heard my mind. Someone must agree because I can't be thinking this about myself. Like you, I wore baggy clothes. I was never told I was ugly. I was never told I was fat, ugly, skinny, or anything. But in my mind, I was like, there must be something wrong because I must be the only one going through this. And because I think we all agree that at some point we felt that no one else could understand because we didn't even understand it. So how can we even talk about it? And who would agree with us?
Who would believe this?
Yeah.
I felt like even though this was something I didn't ask for, I didn't want, it was a clear violation of me. And, it was not something I wanted, I didn't look for, I desired, any of that. It still made me feel like and think that because this had happened to me, then it made me gay. Even though I wasn't, it made me gay.
And it's understandable.
So because of that, then I'm certainly going to hell because this is what the Bible says and this is what the preacher says and this is what my family believes and everybody I know believes, so I'm certainly going to hell. So
we weren't taught about abuse because in the context of a kid, a child would not have known what abuse is or what violation was all about. You knew based on your upbringing and what was taught in church, two men engaging in any form of physical activity was wrong in the eyes of God. Exactly. So whether or not I wanted it, I asked for it, the fact that it happened, that's all that matters. It meant that I committed the biggest crime on this earth.
What happens to that young man or that young child that doesn't understand that sometimes the male body, at least the male body, even though we may pull out mentally during the sex act, our body doesn't always agree with our thoughts and our body responds in a physical way. That has to play a part in how we equate our sexuality to sometimes the misdiagnosis of pleasure within a sexual act.
It destroys you.
Because it confuses you to a point where I have no control over my body. In my mind, I didn't want this, but something's happening.
Your body is playing games with you, and it's saying, half of your brain is saying no, but there's another part of you that is reacting to it.
Yeah, it's like the upper half is in control of only this, and the lower half, you have no control over anything.
I can definitely say it confused the hell out of me. I can't say that I was so clear in my thinking that, I was able to rationalize and justify and any of that, but definitely confused.
I want to ask you, Reggie, first, when was it that you were able to finally give it a title and accept the title? Because I know for a while you couldn't accept it because you blocked it out, but when was the moment that you said, this is what it is?
I was 25.
25. And mind you, but this happened when you were
between the ages of 10 and 11.
So this is 14 years of you bearing this? First of all, blocking it out, but not understanding that although you mentally blocked it out, you were, but you were responding to it in your, you know, in your behavior.
Right, in every area of my life, yeah.
How would your life have been different had you known that it was okay to say something much, much sooner?
I mean, I wouldn't have, I believe I would not have suffered in silence for so long. You know, the suffering would have ended, you know, much sooner. You know, had I felt like I could have told somebody. And then if I was able to tell somebody, then perhaps that, you know, that person could have pointed me in a direction where I could get help. You know, in our community, the African American community, you want help, you pray. At least that's what I was told.
Right.
You pray.
Right. Right.
You leave it at his feet. Is what
Right.
they
You
say.
pray
go to
and there's
church,
no action
you go-
behind
right,
it.
right.
It's you know.
Yeah,
I grew up saying, Mom, you know, something's wrong. Oh, we'll just pray about it.
Yeah,
well,
you pray
that's
about
when
it.
you got up. It was like, oh, it's still there. Am I supposed to just put it under my pillow
Oh yeah,
for
you
the
know,
prayer fairy? You
right.
know.
Yeah, you go to the altar. You go during altar call, and you know, I remember going to the altar several times. I was up there almost every Sunday, and I mean, bawling and on the floor and hands raised and doing everything that they told me to do. But as soon as I got up and I dried my face, it was still there.
Yeah, because there was no work behind the prayer.
Right.
How old were you when you were able to at least call it what it was?
I was the same age as I was when I told my mother and my brother.
Okay, and I know that for both of you, you guys had different moments of, I guess, disclosure. I want to find out for you because I know that you in your cultural aspect of the whole thing, not just religion but homosexuality. And for those who are watching, I want you to explain as best as you can the difference between being here and dealing with the homosexual stigma and being back in Jamaica dealing with the homosexual stigma.
So, back to what you said about how, and I won't use the word African American, but black culture in general, we don't believe in therapy, we don't believe in getting any mental help, so we go to church.
Right.
So, back home, that's all we do. It's either culture and church is like so intertwined, they're literally one. And homophobia pervades the culture so much. It was just a no-no. It was in every song, it was in every colloquial term that was used. The colloquial term, as in America, where they're using something derogatory against black people, they use the N-word. Back home, they'll use a word for gay as Batman.
Okay.
So when I came here, I didn't fully understand the N word, but most of my friends didn't understand the B word either. So the B word was my replica of what the N word meant to you. So if someone were to call the N word, I know how you're going to feel. Mm-hmm. If someone called me the B word, it rips me of my manliness. So back home, it's a crime. It's on the book. It's either 5 to 10 years hard labor. So if you were to be caught in a compromising position with a male, you can get up to 5 years. But if you're caught in the actual physical act of kissing, oral penetration, that's 10 years hard labor. So I got raped again at 21. And when I reported the crime, the police officer made it very clear to me that I could not have gotten raped because it was boogered. And that's the term of homosexual act back home, boogery. So me, the victim, trying to seek solace and help from the police, the group who should have been able to protect me and got rid of this man, ended up told me that I have committed a crime also, which I, for the most part, just couldn't understand that whole rationale. So for the most part, back home, we didn't have any outlets. Because the moment you say something, you're gonna get tagged as a homosexual. Versus here, even though the church may be there, but there were other outlets and avenues where you guys could have gone to therapy. Mm-hmm. Back home, it was non-existent. It just was not gonna happen.
So here you are, thinking that you're gonna go and free yourself by disclosing and getting help through the authorities. So let's say, the cops, the authorities. who are there to serve and protect, as we say, you're being victimized all over again, and you really have no recourse. Yeah. So, in essence, it gives power back to the perpetrator because they know that, hey, you're not going to say anything because you don't want to do hard labor. And let's understand that when you say hard labor, these are both parties. So even if you are the victim of sexual abuse by another male in Jamaica, you can be found guilty and be sentenced to hard labor.
I'm not sure, just to make this clear, this is not 2013. I know there are laws in the books that protect children. But if it's a teenager or an adult male, there's nothing on the books to protect. So it's kind of much of a contradiction. You're now helping the kids, but the same act also occurred to a teenager and an adult male. But in the eyes of my culture, once you pass a certain age as a kid, you should be a grown man. You should be able to protect yourself. Right. But it just doesn't happen.
What was the catalyst for your disclosure? What were you hoping to gain finally from coming clean?
The catalyst was, like I said, I was 25 when I, excuse me, just started to feel like I needed some help. I knew something was wrong. So I was able to, at 25, to finally call it what it was. I had been raped. I had been violated. I was molested. Because before I could never say it. So at 25, I knew I was able to see how my life was in this cycle, which was a continual downward spiral, and having a son at the time, I felt like in order for me to be the parent that he needed, then I had to fix me, or else I was going to damage him. And I had already started because I never allowed anybody to touch my son. If you wanted to see him, you saw him in my arms. You wouldn't hold him. He wasn't coming to your house. So I was always that to him. Right. And I knew I couldn't raise him like that, but I didn't know any other way. I would never let him out of my sight. So he was the catalyst, and just being able to realize something was seriously wrong with me.
And so when you say seriously wrong, let's touch on that. I believe some time ago you mentioned a depression some time ago. Outside of the drinking and everything else, do you feel that you were suffering from a form of depression, or
for sure.
Or were you calling it depression and just didn't know what it was at the time?
No, I knew the amount of hours that I slept was not normal. So I knew something wasn't right about that, but it wasn't until I was 25 that I was able to say, I'm depressed. And that came from watching stuff on television, right, and hearing other people talk about symptoms of depression, sleep being a main thing,
So we had the alcohol, we had the sleep issues, the anger, the self-image. You also briefly touched about the suicide attempt.
Right.
I titled your story, I Was Supposed to Be Here, because you attempted suicide and you were angry at God because you woke up the next day. You were angry because your prayer the night before was, God, if you love me and if you want me to be free, you will take me.
I was tired of living in this place I was in, this dark place.
Was it, because this is what I experienced when I went through it, is it almost like you're living outside of yourself, like you're living in second and third person? It's almost like you're watching your life. Yeah. You're like watching yourself live, but you can't walk into your full self. That's the image I got for myself, especially when I was going through my depression, and I called it what it was in my book. And it's almost as if you're watching every character around you. Every other person is living, and you're like, why can't I just live as freely? Not even knowing their own issues, because everyone has issues. But you're thinking, they can't be going through what I'm going through. I want to be just as free and fancy free and not have that mental garbage.
I wanted to be like the other kids, the other teens, going out and doing what kids do and playing and whatever, going out and hanging with friends. I wanted to do that and be like that. I wanted to be like them, but I couldn't, so living with everything that was going on with me, you know, like you said, I prayed that night, and at 16, and I told God, you know, if you love me like they say you do, like I hear in church, like they tell me, then you won't allow me to wake up in this pain again, because I can't do this anymore. I waited till my family, my mom and my brother went to sleep, and I got up, and everything that was she kept our medicine in the pantry in the kitchen. So I took everything that was there, liquids, pills, I took it all, and then I lay down. And when I heard my mom call my name that morning.
For school?
For school.
Right.
I remember being so pissed. And that like further enraged me. And I was basically pretty much like F God.
It's the doctrine that almost made you feel imprisoned, and now you were cursing the doctrine because now it wouldn't free you.
You won't even take me out of this.
Yeah, because it wouldn't free you. It's like it's almost, it's this back end blame thing, whereas you're giving me reason to hurt myself, but you're not giving me the freedom that I need to forgive myself. But looking back now, do you think that you were going through some form of depression as well too?
Yeah, I'm very sure that I was.
And so was it similar to what we've all gone through, or?
More so just, well, I mean, all my signs were there. Like I said, my mother noticed a lot, even, you know, from the being stuck up in the room and laying down all the time in the dark, and just, you know, to them that was like, that's crazy. You know, something's wrong. What's going on? You know, so even up to the date that I told my mother and my brother, I can't remember exactly to this day what I was doing, but she was asking me to do something, and my emotions were just all over the place that day. And I just flipped out and just said it before I even knew. It just came out of my mouth. And I was like, I got raped. And my mother and my brother was sitting on the couch, and they both like jumped up like to their feet, like, what? And I just like ran to my room. And I was 14 years old. And I just ran to my room, and I just sat there. Then my mom came in, and, you know, and she sat beside me, and she was like rubbing my back, like, what's going on? Who did it? You know, that's always the question. And then I told her. And I think at that moment, like when I told her that, it was amazing, because like everything just seemed like it got better immediately. Like just telling somebody, because she was the first person.
What sexual abuse does, whether it's male or female, it robs you of your authentic self. And oftentimes when I do presentations and I do talk to people, I always remind them that it can never occur without the first component of trust. If we did not trust the persons who perpetrated this act against us, it could not have happened. And they knew deep within that we had that trusting relationship towards them. That's why they were willing to actually do it towards us. Which
is part of the grooming process. It can be abrupt to, it can be something over time, whereas you don't even realize that they're gaining that trust of entry into your life and into that space, whereas at first you're so confused because you trust so heavily that it takes you by surprise. I remember one of my perpetrators was slowly giving me alcohol. But if you're molesting a child that maybe is 8 or 9 who is drunk, I used to just say tipsy, but let's call it really what it was, drunk. When I awoke, I wasn't sure what happened, so how could I blame you if I didn't totally recall? But at some point, you recall. You're like, I'm not drunk anymore. But at some point, you recall, wow. And then as you get older, you get angry. At least I did, because, wow, you got me drunk. I'm a child. You got me drunk. And that trust component is so important that when you shatter a child's ability to trust, it forces them to grow up so fast because they have nothing else to trust but themselves. Right. They get into the wrong experiences because usually as children we are waiting to be taught things. But when you don't trust anybody, you're teaching yourself. And as you know, we make the biggest mistakes when we have no perceived leaders. Right. And it's sad because I know that I had to learn some things the hard way, because if I didn't feel protected by my own family, I'm going to go out in this world and fall way too many times without, like, my safety net was destroyed. And I think that's why when you look at the damage done to male and female, it's sometimes so catastrophic that it takes so much work just to allow yourself that ability to.
And sometimes you don't want to.
Yeah. What I found very interesting in your stories as well is that, and positive, is that I know for you, Reggie, both of you chose purposely to enlist the help of therapy to help you cross that bridge, because you made a decision that you wanted to be free, or to at least start the process. I want to start with you, Reggie. I know that there was a fear going into therapy because you were now having to tell the details and tell the story.
Right.
What was that feeling like?
Just fear, very nervous, but the feeling and the urge to be free was stronger than the fear to not do anything about it. I didn't want to live another 25 years. Well, not live, exist another 25 years, because I wasn't living, in that same state. And I had a kid at this point, you know what I mean? So, like I said, the urge and the feeling to be free far outweighed the fear to not get help, to not go. And so, my very first meeting, I went in and she asked me why was I here. And I sat down on her couch and I let it rip. I said, I think I'm crazy, and here's why I think I'm crazy. X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. I was molested, by my cousin. This is what it made me feel. And it was like a volcano erupted. I had gotten to this place where I didn't want to live like that anymore, and I was ready.
But you held all of that in for all these years. What was that feeling like after the first session? Now, I know it wasn't instant healing, but what was that excavation process, as I like to call it? What did that feel like after that moment of just purging all of that?
I felt light, and I smiled. When I walked out of there, I smiled. And I remember that day was the first time in years that I was ever happy. And I went out and bought myself something, and I think I went to the movies. And, it was the first time I was happy.
That's a good thing, though. That's
really
a good thing, because you're starting to live not outside yourself, but you're starting to live within yourself and say, hey, you know what? I can enjoy this body. I can enjoy this mind. I can, yes, there's work still to be done,
yeah.
But that you made the agreement with yourself that it's time. And I think that time is different for everyone. But sometimes we don't have enough examples of people saying it's okay to make that decision and to find that course of action, because therapy is not for everyone. Let's make it clear, therapy is not for everyone. Some people use forms of self-therapy. It could be a self-help book. It can be talking with family and friends who are constructive in your healing process. Outside of you disclosing what happened, was there anything else after that helped you to further your healing process?
Really, after that moment, after telling my mother, and of course my brother was there, I think the fact of her telling me I had an option. Her thing was, well, what do you want me to do at this point? Because I'm old enough at that point to talk. And she said, what do you want? I know what I want to do, but what do you want me to do? And in my mind, my goal was not to be like, oh, well, I want this to happen to him and this to happen to him. It wasn't even that. It was just, I wanted to just talk to somebody and feel like it was okay to do that. Really, that's all I wanted at that moment.
But what was that feeling like when someone said it was simply okay to say something? It was simply okay to say something, and you didn't have to worry about a stigma. You didn't have to worry about someone questioning what happened or someone calling you something that wasn't true.
When I went to the first therapist to get help, her argument was more surrounding homophobia and the sexual act versus trying to tell me that someone violated me, someone betrayed my trust. She didn't come to me like that. It wasn't until after I got raped again at 21 where that for me was at my death sentence. I attempted to kill myself. There was no if or but. And when I migrated to America and I actually had the conversation with a trained therapist, someone who have dealt with this issue before, I felt as if I was purging all that was going on the inside. Because I remember crying, and last night I told you guys, it wasn't much crying, it was more bawling. And I remember when I stopped, I felt so much lighter because there was a period in my life where I suffered from an eating disorder where as I ate, I would purge myself. And I didn't believe that it could happen to anybody. Then I realized it was one ripple effect of sex abuse. And it was watching Oprah years ago, because at first when she spoke about her sex abuse and her food addiction and her weight issue, I felt she was just being a normal, typical American celebrity who just lied just to get attention. And as I watched her over and over again, I saw her weight went up and down, I realized that shit, the same thing is going on to her, the same thing that I've been doing to my own self. And it's so interesting. It wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago I got a mirror where I was able to look into one and I felt comfortable, and I got up, I had a photograph and I did a full nude shot because I needed to own this. Because for a very, very long time, I wasn't able to look at myself and love the body that I saw in that mirror because I hated myself for such a long time. I didn't even know what loving this meant.
So how important was the self-forgiveness process in all of your healing processes? And so I'll start with you, Reggie.
In my therapy session, when my therapist said, you know, she was the first person to tell me that it wasn't my fault. You know, I didn't do anything wrong. I was a child, and that person violated me. That was the first time I felt relief, and I stopped blaming myself. You know, because I finally knew it really wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything. You know, so that was very important. It was the first initial step in, well, not the first would have been going to therapy, but it was a step forward in my healing process. And just letting that go and stop blaming myself.
Okay, and what about you, Brent?
I think, once again, when I told my mother, that's when everything kind of just hit. You know, talking to her, she told me, you know, well, everything's okay. You're fine. You're going to be fine. This is not your fault. You know, it was that thing that went through my head. So after that, I knew, okay, well, this is my next step to change how I think, to understand why it happened, to understand this is what it is. I need to deal with it. I have to find a way past the situation. Interesting enough, my perpetrator, which is my cousin, he actually passed away 2 weeks after I told my mother.
Wow.
So,
Well, let's explain. His passing away was, it was traumatic in itself.
correct. So that was that was kind of like a whole nother story to itself, but it was shocking more so, and at the same time, it was like I didn't feel like, oh, this is a karma thing. That's not the way I took it, but it was definitely something that I thought to myself, well, I don't feel like I have to worry anymore about anything.
But did his passing allow you to more easily forgive him?
It did. I'll admit it did. Like, after that happened, it was like, at this point, in my head, I still remember before that happened, this is someone who I love to be around. This is someone who was important in my life. I still remember that to this day. After that happened, it was like, I don't want to be around you. I don't like you. You know, that was my mindset up until that day that I told my mother. Like I said, after that, everything got better. But then when he passed, it was just more shocking to me because at that point, even if I wanted to do something about it, it couldn't have been done. You know.
And it's true because now you virtually had the freedom to either go forward or stay where you were. And I want to talk about your experience, because I feel that on levels that we can understand, you had more burdens to bear.
I had a cross. I walked with a cross for a very, very long time, because even when I told my mom at 21 what happened, my mom blamed me. She told me I must have enjoyed it. I must have liked it for him to have done it to me for so many years. And that statement from her, it destroyed me, because I was hoping that by having that conversation with my mother, if no one else believed me, she would have believed me, and she didn't. It made the healing process much more difficult, much more challenging. And by her not believing me, there's a part of me that blamed myself again. Even though I'd gone through therapy, even though I read all the books and I realized that I was young, it wasn't my fault, but we tend to look for love and acceptance from our own families. And when they reject us, and when your mother of other person said that it happened because you wanted it, changed the whole mental dynamics for me. For years, and then we didn't have much of a relationship, because it was hard for me to forgive her for making those statements towards me. And I spiraled into a different phase of depression where I became overly promiscuous. But it got to a point where I was 24, 25, thereabouts. And I think that was when my first book came about. And I got diagnosed with a liver problem, and that was because of the drinking. My niece had just been born, and I realized that I had to stop. And my new purpose for living was because of this young girl, this baby who didn't know anything about me as an uncle, and I wanted to be a part of her life. And I was hoping that the things that happened to me would not have happened to her. And I realized also as I got older that it was a generational cycle for me, because I was not the only person in my family. It happened to other family members who were very, very close to me. But I was the only person who was willing to have an open, honest, candid conversation about the abuse.
Now, I want to actually go into that, because that part I didn't know. And all four of us are sitting here as men, grown men, each with our own full lives. And we're not the only ones in our family that has gone through this. Because I know in the revelation from the confrontation between you and your perpetrator, you discovered that he was also abused. Mm-hmm. What does that say to us sitting here, knowing that these chains still exist in the family, because we were not having these conversations openly? They were more so hush-hush. I feel now having these conversations are going to at least start the breakage of chains. Do I think that the chains will suddenly fly open and and everything is stopped? I think that these open and candid conversations will foster other conversations within families, because a lot of this has to do with cycles. Mm-hmm. A lot of this has to do with cycles, and to be frank, they have to stop. When you look at the chain link fence, you either are a part of the same chain and you gather the same rust and the same, and the same weakness in the chain, or you start a new chain. You start a new cycle of disclosure, of openness. And as males, we're fostering the dialogue that says it's okay to just talk about it. Because as you talk about it, you're going to find out things that allow you to be freer than you were before. Because I'm freer now at 40, having a conversation with you guys, understanding that there was still a little bit of work left that I had to do, just a little bit. But I want to piggyback off of what you said about your niece entering the world, and in essence, you wanting to show her a better version of yourself.
I had to live for her, honestly. There was no question mark about me wanting to go anymore, even though I did attempt to commit suicide after. But I'm in a better place right now. And it's my level of advocacy of being so candid, because there's a lot of people who have an issue with the candidness in which I've presented my story. But I'll be a hypocrite to myself by not being honest to my feelings. The biggest issue that surrounded my abuse was having that love-hate relationship with my perpetrator. I remember when he got shot execution style back home. And we found out later on that it was someone who he also abused.
Wow.
Decided to take the gun and just end his life. And I remember my mom, my aunt, and my sister called me. They were excited. They were overlated that this man is no longer on this earth. But I couldn't function. I didn't know if I needed to be happy. I didn't know if I should grieve for him. But the moment I was able to accept and acknowledge that reality, that he violated me, he violated that trust I had in him, it was not my fault, my body reacted in a human way. It made me moving on so much easier. And it is easier for me to have this open conversation because the issue that most men have are the same issue that we have. The only thing is most men aren't able to verbalize what's really going on the inside. So there was a period where I did feel ashamed in having, because even when I wrote the book the first time, that was when my friends in high school knew about my story. That was when my girlfriends found out about my story. So my coming out and talking about my abuse was more public than I wanted it to happen. And I felt so ashamed because there were so many people who had all these mixed feelings towards me. So I stopped doing advocacy because this just wasn't for me. And then I went to pursue my master's. And my dean said to me, why are you stopping? Why are you giving up this? Because so many people are looking up to you. And he said, furthermore, you're doing all the right things. You're educated. Use that to channel and help others. So I went back and my thesis was in understanding male sex abuse, and the school gave me permission to publish my thesis. And it's by having these conversations and advocating for victims and survivors' rights that I've now gotten a platform for myself. Because you'll see so many Caucasian men that don't look like us, have these open conversation about their abuse and how their families dealt with it. But you rarely see someone of color being so honest, so blunt about what really occurred, how they dealt with it. Because even though I was brought up in a different culture, a different country, we have some unique similarities because we're all descendants of slavery. And the same cultural bringings that the slaves brought from Africa to America and to the Caribbean, it's just the same. We all adapted the same cultural principles where leave it to God and God alone fixes the problem. It doesn't work. We have to talk.
Right, you got it.
This conversation, I think, will open up a broader conversation about how we are going to fix our problems and how much we're able to, and I don't want to say that we're going to become the poster boy, but how much advocacy are we going to put into this?
And also, it also introduces the fact that there are still pieces of each one of our stories that we have not talked about. And the conversation is much more that we have time for. Yes. And it takes a series of conversations, a series of comfort mechanisms to make the conversation open-ended. Do I think things will be fixed if you just sit down one time with someone? No. I think that each time you peel back the layer, you will get to the core of where the conversation needs to be. As I mentioned before, we have the chains that are in families. That doesn't mean that every family has a cycle of this. That means that it is true that it does exist in some families. That means that self-blame is there, that the religious aspect for some people is there, the feelings of inadequacy, the feelings of depression, all these things that we've talked about, and other aspects that we have yet to touch on because we have a limited time in this scope of what we're doing. But I do want to thank you guys for allowing me to use your stories to also create 3 new heroes. You, Brent, you, O'Brien, and you, Reggie, are now heroes, because someone is going to be affected by your story, and someone is going to want to come clean with themselves first and come clean where it counts for their healing process. Because when you heal more, you hurt yourself and others less. Let me make that clear. When you heal yourself more, you hurt yourself and you hurt others less. But I want to piggyback off of something you said about your niece, because you're a parent. Mm-hmm. I get the fact that probably a lot of what you chose to go through for your healing process is because you wanted to show your children the better version of yourself, right?
Yeah, I wanted to be the best version of Reginald, you know, so that I could properly parent my kids and be the parent, the friend, the you know, the everything that they needed. You know, I have two boys, which are my world, and I wanted to be the best me, not just for me, but for them, you know, because I was broken, I was sick, you know, and there was no way I could parent them.
Now, is it fair to say now, because you've come clean and you've accepted, you've not say moved on, but you moved on with living, and as opposed to just existing, now you can foster disclosure within your own family now. Oh, now you make it easier for your sons to be males, to be fully recognized men, but to also have the disclosure that's necessary to foster their own healing processes. And it doesn't even have to relate to what you're going through, but to say, Dad is here. Just talk.
Yeah, I've always been very, you know, open and vocal with my kids, you know, and my kids feel very comfortable in coming to me to talk to me about whatever, you know. So I'm glad that I went and I took the steps and I did the work to heal me.
And you broke the chain.
And I broke the chain.
All three of you, all four of us have broken the chain. And it would be remiss of me not to say congratulations to starting a new chain. And now you have control because you're the top link now. You're the top link. And so whatever comes from you, you can be proud to say, you know what, this is from a healing space. This is not from a cyclic space of hurt and hiding and shame. I know you don't like surprises. I know you don't. But I felt it was important for you to understand just how much impact you have over some special people.
My dad is a good man, great man, always there whenever I need my daddy.
He buys me things, clothes, and gives me stuff that I want, and tells me things I want to know.
And one thing I can say my dad did teach me, whatever choice you make, the consequences gonna come with it.
He's smart, cool, funny, and will always be there for the rest of my life. I love you, Dad.
Daddy, I love you. I thank you. You know, every teaching that you give me daily, I'm taking it with you.
So,
I'm gonna kill you.
it's working. It's working. What you set out to do has already worked. Here.
I'm gonna kill you.
Too. Thank you for not doing nothing like that to me.
See, this is what happens when we make the decision to do better for ourselves. I have this theory as a coach that everything that is attached to us becomes either better or worse based on the choices that we make towards ourselves. It's already working. That no matter what you think, someone's paying attention to what you chose to do better for yourself. So congratulations. That's not the only surprise I have.
Don't do that.
I rescheduled the shoot for a reason, and you know why, right?
Oh, yeah, I know why.
Because it was your birthday,
Right.
and we couldn't do the shoot on your birthday because that was your day. But we couldn't let you leave without me showing you how much I also appreciate you being here as well too. So we have a little something for you.
We got cake.
Come on, bring that cake over here. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brent. Happy birthday to you.
I appreciate that. That's wow. Okay, thank you very much.
I couldn't
and you
put
got it
25
right.
candles because, there's fire alarms in here.
26,
Oh, 26 now. Oh.
but it's next Saturday. But I'll be 26. Yeah.
No, I know. But I couldn't send you off without letting you know how much I appreciate you being here and you telling your story so publicly.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. I want you to make a wish, and I want you to blow out your candles.
Wow. Okay.
Ain't nobody gonna jump out of it. So.
Somebody gonna jump out? Okay. I was waiting. I was waiting. You got it right too. That's exactly everything I like.
And on that note, thank you.
Today I started a new page in my diary. I tried my best to put it in words. Something phenomenal is happening to me. Something is changing, and I think it's the way I choose to see things. I'm starting on a new page. This is what I wrote that day. Dear diary, today I wrote a song.
The 2013 Child Maltreatment Report, released by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Children's Bureau, states that over 61,000 children were the victim of some form of sexual abuse. That breaks down to over 171 children per day, 7 children per hour, and at least 10 children during the duration of this program. The conversation must not end here.